So it means that if you just look at just broadcasting, we've got businesses that have got all different needs and about how they're operating. And what they're all trying to chase down is money. And this is the money that exists in our industry at the moment. There's about 3.5 billion based on what is spent in any year. It's a couple of years old, that figure, but it's the latest figure we've got about from the ABS. On the left-hand side is what is spent by the broadcasters, about half of it. On the right-hand side is what is spent by people other than broadcasters. So you guys, independent producers, all of the businesses in the screen producers body. And you can see the breakdown of what that means, film and television. There's, in that top band, drama, documentary, children's, that is often the area in which a lot of screen businesses are operating. There's a little bit, the 4% up the top is a little bit that is done in-house. 7 does the majority of it, but the rest of it is up for grabs, and that is the money that is stimulated because of entrepreneurial behaviour. And that's what everyone's trying to figure out. What I want to just focus on is what we do to help that to happen and to help businesses to behave and grow and develop. And the biggest thing I think we do is represented here. We try to help people, and sometimes it's uncomfortable helping each other, but it's actually pretty important. And I figure if you can frame, sometimes people in producing world don't want to help each other because they're competing with each other. They don't want to actually lend and share and try to get people to succeed. But I think the best and the brightest and the most consistent workers in this industry are the completely opposite. The people that are generous in their time do exactly that to help someone out in need. And that is the thing that I think has kept the industry actually growing and developing in the right way. So I think there's a starting point that I've seen a lot of people developing this industry trying to keep their ideas very close to their chest, are sort of fearful. The opposite, helping people, working collaboratively with people is the way I would, suggest is the way that the industry best functions. And indeed, if I look at the people that have done really well in this industry, they're kind of doing that. There are 3 things that we do, and Ken touched on it briefly. And I wanted to step through all of these aspects just as a quick overview. Advocacy, industry agreements and industry frameworks, and a lot of events. If we start with the industry part, SPA was originally set up in order to help, it's an employer's body, it was done to help create a framework of agreements that meant that people didn't have to start from scratch with everyone that they're employing. So every producer at the end of the day is employing people. That's the defining difference usually between another part of the production versus the producer. Now you can be in your own right a employee of another producer or another entity that's employed to do that, but if you're starting from scratch, if you're a small business, that's what you've got to take on. And that is usually why people run to the hills when they have to actually get into producing, because employing people is complicated. This is the framework to explain how people are employed in Australia, and it's multi-layered. There's an overarching Fair Work Australia Act in which we as an organisation are registered. It drips down into different awards, and right at the bottom you can create a set of agreements which vary awards, and we own those agreements as an organisation that then license to our members and other people who would like them. And that is what the value we give, because no one can really, it's a complicated thing to put on a production. You want to be able to start from some tangible way of kind of going, well, this is kind of agreed, we're not going to create a strike on set or whatever it is, and that we know how much to pay people. We've bound them into an industrial, handbook, and these are the templates and contracts. And one of the things that when you're a member, you get access to these as a producer member. If you're an associate, we can give you parts of those agreements, not all of them until you're ready for production. But certainly, we were just discussing this earlier with Trish, that certainly rates of pay and other things like that are very valuable to understand how much things may cost you if you're looking at minimum payments. That is something we can provide. And that's, you sort of need to understand all those costing if you're going to start figuring out how much money you've got and all the rest of it. If we go to the second thing I wanted to talk about, and that's our events. So if we touch on advocacy right at the end, Ken mentioned the conference we do each year. It's in Melbourne currently, but it has in the past moved and been in the Gold Coast and also in Sydney. I think in Canberra once or twice, or Thredbo, or and just as a bit of a map of the different images of it. The other thing we try to do is some sort of more closed-off events. This one's called the Prism, which we probably won't do this year because it's an election year, but it's a way of bringing together people to have a really thrashed-out conversation without media. So you don't usually pick up in trade press what's happening, but it's a way of forcing people to calmly get together and talk. And part of the strategy behind this sort of thing is to get together people that would otherwise not know each other's worlds. And that can include a union official and the head of programming at Channel 9. We're often the middleman or middlewoman, further to that other example, where the two parties often that you're employing people, the unionised workforce maybe, and the broadcasters don't see eye to eye. So you need to try to get them together to help understand each other's world so that you can kind of work through a lot of things. That's the example. The other thing we do a lot of, and it's certainly my background, is advocacy work. This is a shot taken of Laura from Princess Pictures and Magda, who were up in Canberra with us. We do an annual breakfast and screening event, and they were there to promote the industry broadly under the Open Slather program, but we also had the Kettering incident screening. Each year we do a long dinner with the council and other people and politicians in Canberra as well, and then a breakfast. And this is, of course, last year because things have changed somewhat in the arts portfolio. But what we're doing is we're selling together a package of policy priorities. Now, the complication is, if you go back to the three businesses working in TV, and there's about 500 businesses in SPA, those three businesses have got different needs because they've all got different relationships, let alone feature film producers or documentary producers or games producers or kids producers. So what we're trying to do is aggregate complicated and fractured messages to be able to give government a clear sense of what the industry collectively could do. This is an example of a template we were trying to do it's two-sided, way too many messages still, but it's only 8, to give to government. And from that, we can even rip that message right back to simpler messages, because the point of it is to say to government, clearly, this is the problem, this is the solution, and this is what you can do. And there's a lot of noise otherwise at government. And this is another example of a message we're delivering at the moment. And you'd be aware of this. And this is a more positive message about who we are and what we do, and a growth message, which is important. They're just a couple of ones. I spend a lot of time in Canberra. This is a Senate inquiry that was happening, or it was actually a government inquiry, earlier this week. It was about a review that was happening on, and is happening currently, about regional and rural content, broadcasting and screen industry. And this is us presenting to that committee. Bronwyn is the chair. And what we're also trying to do is not just present one-on-one, we're also trying to deliver very public messages that help to influence the discussion behind the scenes. This is an article that was done. We brought Dominic White, who's the AFR editor, to MIPCOM to talk about what's happening in the screen industry, and he did a 3-page spread. Some photographs of Chris Oliver Taylor down the bottom there, and the ladies from Highwire Films, and Anita, who was at the time at ITV. But the point was to sort of talk about what's going on behind the scenes, and indeed some of the challenges, including how local content subsidised, so that a broader audience understands the environment we're all operating. Sometimes I'm sort of put in the spotlight, which everyone thinks I might like a lot, but it's also very scary to be put on TV and having to do that. But you realise that what you're trying to do is provide a focal point for the industry to be able to communicate, and it's part of the territory. It was probably the thing I was not as prepared for, how much that work I have to do is, and it doesn't always please everyone, because everything that comes out of my mouth has a consequence for a lot of people, but that's the job I have. And what you're trying to do is make sure you get on well with this guy at the moment. And look, the part of the problem we've got over the last few years has been the amount of change in government policy direction and people because of the turbulence at the top, essentially. Before him we had this guy, before him we had this guy, before him we had this guy, Before him, we had this guy. And these are all in the space of about 3 or 4 years. And that's changing, and indeed maybe not changing, policy direction. Before I sort of throw it open to questions and other things, I wanted to just focus on him because this is probably how we would maybe potentially better like to think of Peter Garrett's success rather than this image. And I thought this was kind of, it brought me back to sort of thinking about storytelling. And there's a great, I think, an interview done with Al Clark, and he was talking about how what he did and does in his films is he's trying to create, in the context of 90 minutes or 30 minutes on TV, whatever it is he's doing, but usually film, a single image that can best represent what it is. So he's trying to find that moment that is actually a still image in amongst a moving picture. And I kind of think these images remind me very much of Peter Garrett. If I'm going to sum up the man, this was the image he was saying was really critical. If you've watched documentaries about Priscilla, this ended up being the hero shot of what it actually was. And they're trying to almost create 90 minutes to create that photograph. The same thing with Mad Max. There isn't an agreement specifically for a web series yet that I know of, and someone correct me if everyone's going no. So the framework is agreements around feature filmmaking and television making. Now, a lot of web content is connected to television content, so there's an extension of some of those agreements into the internet space, but there isn't something yet around that. Is it our job? It depends on whether there's a need from the industry to prioritise that and how much. We're servicing sort of 500 members, so the question is how many of those are operating in a web space only and would like us to do that? And then that means, okay, let's scrap the negotiation for the feature film space, let's just focus on the web space. So when that becomes a point, and it's only web content that we're creating, probably is, but there's not that many people who are operating purely around web content. They're usually as extensions of other types of content because the money behind web content isn't quite there yet. So I imagine it will be something that we have to turn our minds to soon.